Revolution changed the face of the city. First, there was the elegant St. Charles Hotel. Then the stately row houses built by Baroness Michaela Elmenester Pontalba. She was one of New Orleans' great benefactors, just like her father had been when Louisiana was a Spanish colony. New Orleans had become the cultural capital of the South and West. And the heart of the city's cultural life was music. Music, more than anything else, erased the divisions of class, race, and ethnicity, and brought New Orleanians together on common ground. Everyone attended the opera, from slaves to slave owners.
Well, you don't want to idealize the era, but there is certainly a lot to recommend it, in that, to a degree which we absolutely have lost, culture with a capital C was something that a surprisingly diverse part of the population participated in.
A man sang an uncouth song to the dancing, which I suppose was in some African language, for it was not French. Never have I seen anything more brutally savage.
Since colonial times, Congo Square had been an open market where slaves were allowed to sell their own produce and merchandise on their day off. But it also became a place where the slaves could openly play African music. Traditional dances like the bambula, the kalinda, and the chica helped these African Americans to preserve an important part of their heritage. The rhythms of Congo Square also became a key ingredient in the rich musical gumbo of New Orleans, the city which gave America its first great composer.
Louis Moreau Gottschalk, born in 1829, died in 1869. He's one of those people like Mozart and Chopin, great genius who died young. He's arguably the greatest musician that New Orleans produced, or America produced, in the 19th century.
New Orleans also attracted artists like John James Audubon, remembered for capturing Louisiana's natural beauty. Marie Adrienne Persac illustrated the state's man-made wonders. New Orleans, and indeed all of Louisiana, had become the engine that drove the economy of the South. This engine was powered by steam. The first steamboat to navigate the Mississippi arrived in New Orleans in 1811. By 1850, more than 3,000 steamboats were docking there each year.
The magnificent floating palaces of steamers frequently look like moving mountains of light and flame. So brilliantly are these enormous river leviathans illuminated, outside and inside.
New Orleans wasn't the only city to prosper from the great paddle wheelers. Using specially outfitted steamboats, it took Captain Henry Miller Shreve 5 years to clear the Red River Raft, a log jam that stretched from Arkansas to Alexandria, choking the Red River for nearly 200 miles. Once he opened the river, commerce boomed in North Louisiana and Texas, making Shreveport the most important city in the region. With new economic opportunities opening there, Anglo-Americans began to pour into the hill country of North Louisiana.
I am very well satisfied with my land. It is, beyond all doubt, the prettiest section of the world I ever saw. The woods look like a meadow, grass a foot high.
This frontier was once unbroken Indian territory. Now only the remnants of a few scattered tribes remained, struggling to survive. For a while at least, Louisiana's Indians would seem to have become an invisible people, eclipsed by a nation of newcomers. As more and more Anglo-American pioneers moved in, the land was transformed. Corn patches became cotton fields, and crude log cabins were soon replaced by stately plantation homes. North Louisiana came to look a lot like the rest of the South.
North Louisiana has developed differently than South Louisiana because North Louisiana was much more of a frontier at the time of incorporation into the Union.
New settlers brought other changes to Louisiana. South Louisiana remained largely Catholic, just as it had been since colonial times. But to the north came waves of American Protestant congregations, led by ministers like Leonidas Polk, the first Episcopal bishop in the state. He would later die on the battlefield as a Confederate general.
Protestantism is the main form of religion, and the ties to that community, to the southern community, I think are much stronger in northern Louisiana than they are either in the southeast or the southwestern portions of the state.
However different, North and South Louisiana had one thing in common. Both grew rich from the plantation economy. Louisiana produced 1/3 of all the cotton exported by the United States and virtually all the sugar. Following the Mississippi River from Natchez to New Orleans, mansions stretched like a long strand of pearls. But plantation life wasn't all magnolias and mint juleps.
I think it's been glamorized too much. I don't think being a plantation owner was necessarily the happiest, most satisfying life one could have. I think we're misled too often by the structure. The beautiful, well-maintained or restored old plantations have an aura about them, a glamour about them, a history about them, that people look at it and say, oh boy, it must have been wonderful to have lived in those days. I don't think it was so wonderful. I really don't. They left a rich legacy of architecture, but also were major players in America's greatest ugliness, and that's slavery.
The slaves are seated on benches arranged like an amphitheater. In order to give them a better appearance, the merchants keep them quite clean when they are exhibited to the buyers. The latter come and choose the slaves who will fill their needs.
By 1850, New Orleans was the nation's largest slave trading center, with some 300 dealers. The Masonic Temple, the St. Louis Hotel, the Exchange at Esplanade Avenue, all regularly auctioned human beings like livestock. Within a half-mile of the St. Charles Hotel alone, there were 25 slave depots. The slave markets were often the scene of unspeakable human misery.
Never have I seen such an exhibition of intense, unmeasured, and unbounded grief as when Eliza was parted from her child. Oh, how piteously then did she beseech and beg and pray that they might not be separated. Why could they not be purchased together?
If you were sold in New Orleans, the chances that you would stay here were not very, very good. So slaves in Kentucky, Missouri, along the Mississippi River dreaded the prospect of being sold to New Orleans. The dread that you're going to be sold a long, long ways from your loved ones with no chance that you're going to ever get back. And that's basically what it meant, being sold down the river to New Orleans.
Even from within the walls of their grand mansions, some slave owners couldn't hide from the horrors that had made them rich.
I am a slaveholder myself, yet you must not think that I approve of that inhumane commerce. No, I assure you there is no man on earth that can see it in a more horrid light than myself.
Slavery barbarized the whole society. Slaveholders were brutal in their treatment toward slaves. Blacks were brutal in their relationship toward each other. Whites were brutal toward each other. You got used to seeing people mistreated, and it didn't affect you as much as people would have seen it for the first time from the outside.
Slavery is based within violence. Slavery doesn't work without violence. It doesn't work without slaves being kept in their place by having their lives threatened, their children threatened, their relations between husbands and wives, mothers and children being severed.
America had long been haunted by the specter of slavery. Finding excuses for it was getting harder. By the middle of the 19th century, the political compromises and concessions that had held the country together were strained to the limit. The differences between the northern and southern states were rooted in deep cultural and political differences. But in the end, what mattered most was money.
The slave owners were never better off. The price of slaves increased by 70% between 1850 and 1860, which is an indication of what was happening to the profits from owning slaves.
Without the institution of slavery, the great staple products of the South would cease to be grown, and the immense annual results, which are distributed among every class of the community, would cease.
One thing I think it's important to realize is how much money people had tied up in slave capital. Throughout the South, it was about $5 billion, but if you talk about an individual, for example, a prime slave, say, male age 25, worth, say, $1,500 in 1850 or 1855, this would translate to about $35,000 today. So a person owning even one slave, this was a large investment, but a person owning 100 on a plantation or a large number of slaves, this was a tremendous capital investment, even worth more than the land that supported them. The land was not as expensive as the slaves themselves. No one has ever given up that much money without some kind of a fight.
In Louisiana, that fight began the day Abraham Lincoln was elected president.
The Southerners were saying, we used to control the House with respect to the issue of slavery. Now we have an anti-slavery party in control of the House. They had an anti-slavery president. And they were sort of saying, all we've got to defend us now is the Senate. And how long will that last? So they felt they saw creeping advances by a hostile political coalition that would show them no mercy. And that's why they decided to get out while the getting is good.
The Southern people think the result of the election is a sort of declaration of hostility by the North. Nearly every day, Lincoln's effigy is hanged in the principal streets and squares. Secession is openly talked of, apparently with increasing confidence in its success.
The Southern leaders were not fearful. They had become arrogant. We are the great economy. Who are you people with your whole system falling apart to tell us what we can't do?
Have our northern people disregarded the Constitution? We are determined to be an independent people out of the old Union. If we cannot be equals in it, give us our rights.
Everyone recognized the gathering storm on the horizon. Senator Judah Benjamin offered his farewell speech to the United States Senate and then returned home to Louisiana to prepare for what was to come.
And now, Senators, within a few weeks we part to meet as senators in one common council chamber of the nation no more forever. Whatever the fate of this horrible contest, no man can tell. But this much I will say, you may carry desolation into our peaceful land, and with torch and fire you may set our cities aflame, but you can never subjugate us. Never.
In January 1861, a convention of Louisiana's leaders met at the state capitol in Baton Rouge. They voted 113 to 17 for secession. The news was announced to a cheering crowd outside. For almost 50 years, Louisiana had been one of the United States. Now she had torn herself from that union, but at a cost her people could not yet conceive. To learn more about Louisiana's rich history, visit us online at louisianahistory.org.
Major funding for the series, Louisiana, A History, was provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and the State of Louisiana. Corporate funding was provided by Bank One, proud to celebrate Louisiana's diverse past and committed to investing in our state's future. Community Coffee, part of Louisiana's rich history. Since 1919, devoted to providing signature coffees to our communities. Additional funding was provided by the following history patrons, helping all citizens discover the extraordinary legacy of Louisiana and its people. To order a VHS or DVD set of the series, Louisiana, A History, or the companion book, Louisiana, An Illustrated History, call 1-800-973-7246 or write to the address on your screen.